everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. It is February. It is, in fact, if you guys are watching live, it is Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day. I know there is nothing that anyone would prefer to do in this industry than spend Valentine's Day with three bearded men, all talking about beauty and cosmetics. So, Nate, I feel like we have actually set this up for perfect success. It will either be the best show we've ever done, or it might have slightly different demographical skews. But if you guys are new to Manufacturing Hub, welcome. If you guys have been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, we do our very best to have an open, honest, fun conversation. This month, we're talking all about CPG, and today we're going to dive into quality and compliance with beauty and cosmetics with Nate, who will go ahead and introduce in just a minute. If you guys are on LinkedIn, which is our major platform, please feel free to go ahead and use the comment buttons, assuming the LinkedIn gods are with us and we see the comments here on our restream. We will do our very best to go ahead and pull them in. I see Vlad is commenting live during this. If we don't see him, we'll do our best to go bring them up and go ahead and get back to them if there are any comments that we need to get back to as we go through that. Without further ado, again, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 153. I'd like to introduce Nate Call, our guest for today. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time, Nate. I think it's going to be a very, I want to say, insightful and interesting conversation. We've already talked a little bit off stream about different topics that I'm also interested in. So, Nate, before we dive into the conversation around cosmetics and maybe quality, could we get a little bit more information about your background? What was your journey into manufacturing and ultimately what you are doing today?
Yeah. Appreciate you guys having me on the show. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I own a company called Qualitas Executive Group. We are a quality and compliance consulting firm, primarily serving cosmetics and beauty companies, as well as dietary supplements, food, beverage, some adjacent categories on both the brand and manufacturing side of the industry. So having sat on both sides of the table, it's interesting the perspective we've developed as we walk into our consulting engagements and do a lot of on-site supplier auditing for our brand clients. But how I became a quality person is interesting. I was lured away from the automotive industry when I was about 19 with the promise of wealth and riches through door-to-door alarm sales. And I did that in Oklahoma for about 3 weeks, made maybe $700 in 3 weeks, realized this probably isn't a good career decision for me. So drove myself back home to Utah, took a temp job at a dog food manufacturing facility, working 3:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., which is the most wonderful shift you could possibly work, by the way. Heavy sarcasm there. Was there for a few months and decided that was not the life for me and asked to be placed at a more normal company with more regular business hours. And I started working on a production line at a food and beverage manufacturer in Utah. Was almost immediately moved from production into quality and haven't looked back since. And really after that role, especially at the dog food manufacturing facility, while I didn't enjoy that environment necessarily, I really enjoyed the processes surrounding manufacturing. And it's always fun going to different facilities. And I tell people, my life is really a different episode of how it's made every single day. Every site we go to, we get to see how the sausage is made. And it's really fun to travel the world and see how people do the same thing in extremely different ways. And I've been fortunate that, I've had opportunities to travel the world. I've been to 34, 35 countries, 600 plus manufacturers all over the place. And especially within cosmetics, which until MoCRA has been effectively unregulated in the United States, everyone sort of kind of tried to do things in a sensible, structured way. We have some manufacturing clients and manufacturers we work with who are ISO 22716 certified for cosmetic GMPs. But I would say the vast majority in the US manufacturing wise are not certified, are very unfamiliar with ISO. They're very unfamiliar with the requirements coming through MoCRA. and there will be a lot of feathers ruffled through this regulatory change. And I'm excited to do what we can to help the industry grab that reg by the horns and make magic happen.
Nate, I've got a ton of questions for you on, you've mentioned a lot of, I want to say, keywords that we do want to cover, but, taking a step back into maybe that transition into the first quality role. So I guess I understood that you didn't have any formal training on the quality side. So my
Right.
question would be, what helped you understand the industry and the requirements? And, for someone who's maybe trying to do that today, what are maybe some certifications or programs that you would recommend going into quality?
Yeah, I think what really drove the change from production into quality is I've always been a very process oriented person. I've always tried to look at things from that 30,000 foot view to understand, even if my task or my job is a very small piece of that machine, what how is what I'm doing going to affect everyone up and downstream, and are there things that I can do to make life easier, better, and ultimately result in a higher quality product? And when I was at that facility, not the dog food plant, but the one where I was moved out of production into quality, my role was literally to grab glass bottles with my hands and put them on a conveyor for 12 hours a day. That was my job. And I quickly realized that is a very labor intensive, not so efficient kind of process. And what we ended up doing, myself and one of the other temps, is we created kind of a miniature production line where instead of everyone grabbing, 2 bottles in each hand, placing them on the conveyor, walking back to the pallet, back and forth, we created kind of a daisy chain system of passing bottles down through a human line, and it ended up being about twice as fast just doing it that way. And so one day we were standing on the line, and the quality director of that site walked over, and he was just staring at us for probably 2 straight hours, just mean mug staring at us. And I was like, I'm going to be fired. I don't know what I'm doing. Did I not change my gloves? What's happening? And he pulled me to the side and said, if you're interested in quality, I have something for you in receiving inspection. And so I ended up moving immediately into that incoming inspection role. Really enjoyed learning how to, aseptically sample product, and learned a lot about statistical process control and inspection methodology, testing, all of that fun stuff. But I think as far as, taking that leap, and some tools, resources, and certifications that I found to be really helpful, ASQ, the American Society for Quality, is the number one place and the number one group that I think has really shaped my technical approach to quality. I have the ASQ Certified Manager of Quality Organizational Excellence certification, a few others, Certified Quality Auditor, all of that fun stuff. And there are certifications really for anyone at any level within the quality profession, in a very industry agnostic way as well. You don't have to be a food and beverage person or a cosmetics person. You can work in automotive, aerospace and defense, hard goods, any industry. And quality, I like to think, is really 80% transferable across any industry. And so leaning on ASQ webinars, the certification training courses, and the handbooks themselves has been huge. I have the ASQ Certified Manager of Quality Organizational Excellence handbook at my desk, and I flip through it all the time. If I'm looking for some investigational technique that I can't remember how to do offhand, I know I can flip to that page and it'll walk me through it. So it's a very biblical text in my life, that ASQ handbook. And I think also being fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with some of what I would say are the most hardcore quality people you could possibly imagine. I think a lot of the stereotypical, very hard-nosed, black and white, it's either good or bad kind of quality leader. I've worked with a lot of people like that. For better or worse, I think there's merit to that in some cases, right? If we're talking about food, we have a food safety issue. that's black and white. We don't want to try to find a gray area here to make, a product that tested positive for salmonella make its way into the marketplace, because we don't want to destroy that lot. Yeah, I mean, I think having access to mentors and leaders is huge. And I think there's no better place to learn what quality is than during an audit, right? Where your feet are put to the fire, and the systems and processes that you work inside of every day are eviscerated basically by an auditor. They want to figure out what you're doing wrong. They want you, maybe they don't want you to fail, but they want you to prove to them that, you've intellectually thought through as many real world scenarios as you can, and you've designed your system in such a way that you will prevent the occurrence of those issues. And if they do occur, you have a structured pathway to resolve whatever situation came up. And I really enjoyed that aspect of quality, and that's a killer spot to learn.
If I can make a comment before I pass the metaphorical mic to Dave, I think that auditor, the word itself, sometimes could mean, a negative component of, I want to say, manufacturing. But a lot of times, and I'm assuming, Nate, that's your relationship with customers, where you come in to help
Right.
them get up to standards. So you're essentially an internal ally for that activity for when the actual audit hits, right? And I want to make sure that we paint the right picture for the listeners who might be, on the industrial automation side. So when they hear audit, they necessarily think of the FDA coming in and sort of slapping them with fines. But in your scenario, you're helping them prepare for the audit. So you're taking their position and understanding what's being done and where do we need to get to in order to be compliant, right? I want to make sure that we get
Right.
that nuance correctly.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the main things we do at Qualitas is manufacturing gap assessments against, insert a regulation or certification scheme. With cosmetics, we do a lot of gap assessments against ISO 22716, that international GMP standard. And it's really fascinating to, be on the side of the client, so to speak, when you're doing those assessments, versus kind of being blind to their day-to-day operations and just walking in with that checklist and then going to town, right? And I think a lot of our clients understand that for us to do our best work, they have to show us everything. They have to be a lot more forthcoming than they may be with, an unannounced inspection by whoever. And they have to show us where they know the skeletons in the closets are hiding, and they have to show us where they know their deficiencies are from their perspective. And we typically almost always find other areas that are ripe for improvement. And it's interesting. The gap assessment is really fun for us. We can typically do it in about 2 days. We turn around a report within 48 hours, 2 business days of leaving the site typically. That will include, a full checklist, strengths, weaknesses, kind of a SWOT analysis of some type, and then recommendations. And that's really the meat and the outcome of, working with Qualitas to do the gap assessment is, here are all of these things that we can improve. So what do we do now? How do we make these improvements? And we build a very structured 90-day action plan with a light touch CapEx and OpEx assessment to determine, are we going to need to add overhead in perpetuity to make sure that we can bridge these gaps? A lot of the sites we go to have no quality team. This is a story that we hear often in smaller manufacturers where, the site is less than 20 people. There's a manufacturing manager, a production manager, someone like that who's been in the industry for a while and is vaguely familiar with quality and sort of understands what needs to happen, right? Like they know we need to wash our hands, we need to wear gloves, we need lock codes, we need basic GMP attire like hair nets, beard nets, lab coats, things like that. And they're relatively familiar, but there's not depth there. And, if you're audited and challenged on any of those processes, the response has to be deeper than, this is how we did it at the last place I worked, which was bigger than this place, so it must be the right way to do it, right? So we try to rationalize why we're doing things and get people out of the mindset of, I did this thing this way at my last job, we have to do it this way here. And, really building what we call right-sized quality and compliance systems at the manufacturer and brand level, because a quality system that works really well for a $250 million manufacturer will bankrupt a $20 million manufacturer, and it just doesn't make sense. So we really try to pay attention to where the business is in its journey, how that growth curve is looking, maturity of the team, and the overall organization's willingness to make the changes that they need to make to achieve whatever that desired quality outcome is, which is typically getting that ISO certification to win business from a more mature client. The big clients that you see, the big brands all over the supermarket, all over Amazon, they all want that business, and you're not going to get it if you're not ISO 22716 certified.
Absolutely. I think that was a good point. I was going to make a similar point. I feel like earlier in my career, anytime an auditor would come, be it internal or external, you would see them going and marking down things, and you think, oh, that they're dinging us on these things. This must be really bad. But I find as I kind of mature and age through it, it is very much on especially the auditors that we hire, like you guys, Nate, they're groups who are here to help us become better. And we need someone to come through and be absolutely brutal. Honestly, at this point, if an auditor were to come and say, hey, you guys are doing everything perfectly, I would strongly consider if they were worth any amount of money that I just paid for them to come. Because if I needed someone to tell me that we were doing perfectly, then we could have just, patted ourselves on the back and had a pizza party on a Thursday afternoon.
Yeah,
hire me
definitely.
Anyone who's looking, Vlad is your yes man. So please call Vlad. He can say yes in, I don't know, 3 to 7 languages, maybe more, depending upon how much time and how much money you pay him.
Those are good numbers, Vlad. Those are good numbers.
Nate, I want to go ahead and jump into beauty and cosmetics, because I'm interested to get into that. And we've kind of teased a bit of MoCRA and what that's doing to the industry kind of today and into the future. But before we get there, can you set the stage for, again, Vlad and I, and probably most of our listening audience who are not beauty and cosmetic experts, as to the wild, wild west that was beauty and cosmetics last year, 2 years, 5 years ago, and maybe how that's matured?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, before MoCRA, really looking back, even 3 years ago, there really wasn't a unified standard in the US for cosmetics manufacturing, especially. And on the brand side, it's still very much the wild, wild west. There are a lot of new requirements for brands within MoCRA. But anyway, on the manufacturing side, we had FDA GMP guidance from like 2013 that was similar to ISO 22716, but it's guidance, right? It's a suggestion. You should consider doing this thing in this way. Guidance has no teeth, and FDA couldn't hold anyone accountable in not doing things that way. FDA had no mandatory recall authority. They were not able to really come and inspect your site suddenly or randomly, because there was no requirement to register with FDA. You could register voluntarily, and some clients require that of manufacturers. But yeah, I walked into sites 3 years ago where I didn't see hair nets, I didn't see gloves. I saw people wearing shorts, open-toed shoes, texting on their phones, standing on a production line with the door propped open and someone smoking a cigarette right outside the door. And there were very limited controls there. And that's kind of an extreme example, but not really. And
not really.
I've walked into what the industry would say are very mature sites that do $100+ million a year in contract manufacturing revenue, which is a high number for contract manufacturers. But I would walk in and I would see a box of donuts in the corner of the production room after reading SOPs that say, we don't allow food and drink in production areas. Our pest control program prevents blah, blah, blah through whatever. And then I would see a bouquet of flowers because it was so-and-so's birthday and they were having a birthday party for her in production. And that's also why there's donuts. And just random things like that, on the food and dietary supplement side are are very serious and are taken very seriously, right? You bring food into any facility, that's a contamination hazard. There could be allergens there that are not present on any product label in the facility. You could contaminate things and cause all sorts of issues. And you don't want to find half of a donut in your bottle of shampoo, right? And it was fascinating to see how kind of laissez-faire people were about product safety and good manufacturing practices. But I think, and I imagine we'll get to story time soon. I have a fun cosmetics GMP horror story, but yeah, there were very limited controls is really what I'm getting at. And the expectations were low then, and they continue to be low now, even with ISO 22716, which I fully expect FDA will use as the framework to build the good manufacturing practices required by MoCRA. We should know more by the end of the year. I think the date they gave themselves to release that proposed GMP set of rules is like December 23rd of 2024 this year. But yeah, it's been chaos, and it will continue to be chaos, I think, for years to come. MoCRA, final rule for GMPs is due like 2025, 2026, December 23rd, 2025. You'll probably have a year or two to comply with that requirement, which, if you think about that, we're in 2024 right now. We should know what the final GMPs are in 2025. Give us 2 years to comply. We're into 2027, and then FDA will start inspecting sites 2027. We'll probably inspect a few before then, but we are years away from really feeling the effect of improvements with GMPs inside of cosmetics. And my speculation there is, a lot of the big box retailers, a lot of the massive digital platforms where everyone sells their thing, those groups will be the ones that really hammer people on MoCRA compliance. They're not going to wait for FDA to say, get it together 3 years from now, everyone, we'll see you then. It's going to be, nope, you have to do this, and you are not going to wait. If you want to do business with us, this is what you have to do, even though it's not at its compliance date within MoCRA from FDA. You're going to have your facility registered. You're going to have your products listed. You're going to have a quality management system. You're going to have to review your labels, substantiate safety data, do all of the things MoCRA is requiring, because it puts the retailer at risk. It puts those digital platforms at risk to rely on FDA to enforce the regulations, which I always tell people, they have to remember regulation is the minimum requirement. That is not, the top of the pyramid. That is the bottom. It's great to high five yourself if you comply with the regs. I think it's good to do that. You should comply with regulations, but that's not where the journey stops. That's really where it begins when it comes to quality.
Nate, if I can maybe take a quick step back to again untangle maybe the definition for cosmetics, right? Because I know again, and I was wrong about this in our conversation offline. There's obviously the FDA food classifications, which go from class 1 and up, but cosmetics have their own classification, which is called cosmetics, and so the MoCRA is going to fall under that classification, and it's going to be regulated by the FDA. I guess, could you explain to us what is, first of all, a cosmetic, and also just to be clear on who's going to enforce the MoCRA once it is released?
Yeah, so I have the FDA definition here. So FDA defines cosmetics as articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. So that is a cosmetic. With FDA and MoCRA, there were no regs before, right? And now that we have MoCRA, which is the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act of 2022, FDA now has teeth to enforce these requirements. They can force you to recall product if it does not comply with the law. They will force you to provide access to records that you have. They will force you to, show them your safety substantiation, show them how you substantiated your label claims, how you are, really standing behind the claims you're making with your product. And in the past, they had no teeth. They could kick and scream and, post about you on FDA.gov and say, we have a safety alert for X, Y, and Z cosmetic, and we advise the public to destroy this product or discontinue use or something like that. But yeah, MoCRA gives FDA a lot of teeth to do what should have been done years ago in the cosmetic space. And classification of cosmetics is interesting because, I use the example of facial cleanser all the time, where if I have a facial cleanser that, meets that cosmetic definition of, it is cleansing my face, but then I say something like, this is a helpful acne treatment and will reduce the appearance of acne or whatever, I've now referenced the medical condition, tied it to my product by saying my product will treat this medical condition. And now, just by saying that about my product, it is a drug in the eyes of the FDA. And making those statements does not have to happen on the product label, does not have to happen on your website. It can be a comment on a Facebook post that the brand's Facebook account responded to, or it could be in a YouTube video. It could be a blog post that talks about an ingredient in the product that is known to treat acne. And then there's a call to action to purchase one of your products with that ingredient. So it's very challenging, I think, to manage claims and understand when it's appropriate to say certain things and when it's really not appropriate to say things. And you'll always be challenged, or may be challenged, by competitors if you start making drug claims and the FDA doesn't know about it. You could be subject to an NAD challenge, a National Advertising Division challenge, where it's basically a boxing match between you, NAD, and your competitor, and they're going to try to force you to prove that you can stand behind whatever statement you made about your product.
Interesting. Let me ask Nate, because I feel like we could continue down this forever. And as I told Nate and Vlad, as Vlad was reading the back of all of his supplements right before we got on, there's a 20% chance we lose Vlad for the entire episode as he tries to reread all of the pills and powders and other things that he takes. So, Nate, let me go ahead and ask the question about some of those horror stories, right? I know that we talked about a couple beforehand. Can you give us a couple of examples? Can you tell us a couple of stories of maybe worst case scenarios? Because then I also want to talk about some of the best case scenarios and say, hey, we're hopefully going to go in that direction with the vast majority of these groups.
Definitely. My favorite story to tell, I post about this on LinkedIn a few times a year, is this story comes from a cosmetic contract manufacturing site on the western half of the US. And this was a pretty large contract manufacturer, ISO 22716 certified for several years at that point. At the time, I was I think, quality supervisor for a brand. And we had a micro contamination issue where we had bloated bottles in one of our cosmetics. And through our investigation, we couldn't figure out, just from testing or physical product inspection, that we had custody of what was really going on. And so I hopped on a plane with one of our engineers and we went over to this site. But it was funny because we had agreed that we would show up on Tuesday, and we showed up on Tuesday, and the gentleman, the COO, I believe, was just flabbergasted we were there. He thought we were going to be there on Wednesday. So in his mind, we showed up one day early. And this guy's, wearing flip-flops, has shorts on, just chilling, just hanging out at this facility. And I told him, we're here now. We need to go tour your facility. I want to see your water system. I want to see sanitation documentation. I want to see everything. And so we did a very, very fast audit of this facility. And I always like to start with a tour, so I have something to anchor those documents to. And so we walk out of the office, go back into the production area. I immediately notice that these massive bay doors are just wide open. It's the middle of the day, I think like 11:30 in the morning, doors wide open. I saw a bird flying around up in the rafters. And I asked him about that, and I said, why are the doors open? And he said, oh, it gets hot in here, so we like to open the doors and let a breeze in. And being a quality person and thinking always of contamination, I, in my mind, knew that probably wasn't a good idea. Maybe they should invest in some fans. And I told him, let's think about a different way to improve airflow here and keep those doors shut. And we continue walking through the facility. He takes us over to the production line that filled this product for us. And 10 feet from the fill nozzle, which, by the way, was like a 3,000 gallon tank with a check valve. And some poor guy was just down there cranking that check valve open and close, filling product for us. And 10 feet from him is a pole. And there's a guy with a grinder grinding yellow paint off of this pole right next to our production line. And obviously that's an issue. We called that out. He stopped. It was like, oh, it was on the preventive maintenance schedule, and trying to convince me this made sense. And it was good because it was in their PM protocol. And we continue the tour. We get to the warehouse, and I see a cat just dart right in front of me. And I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. And I asked him, was that a cat that I just saw? And he starts smiling and said, yeah, we had an issue with mice or rodents of some kind a few years ago. And my wife is involved in some type of way with an animal sanctuary where they rescue cats. And I asked him, are you about to tell me that your solution for your rodent problem was literally to bring in cats, like the natural predator of your problem creature here? And he chuckled and was like, yeah, they're actually very effective at catching mice. And I was like, yeah, I know. I think we all know that. And I asked him, what are we going to do when the cats become a problem? And these were practically feral cats, mind you, off the street, 3-legged cats. And he was like, oh, we can have her bring in the dogs and they'll bark and run out of the building. And the other people in the tour start laughing. And I was just like, is this dude serious? And he was like, let's go around back. You wanted to do a perimeter tour? Let's go around back. And he takes me to what was an incredibly well-constructed tower of used car tires. And they made this palatial town for these cats. And so each cat had its own tower of tires with a sheet of plywood on top, and they cut holes in them. And it was awesome for the cats, I'm sure. And skipping to the end of this story, well, you shouldn't do that. Don't use cats for pest control. It's frowned upon. We ended up finding that they hadn't tested their water in something like 2.5 years. The guy who was grinding paint off of this pole was also responsible for sanitation and just, following the paper trail. He didn't sanitize the nozzles that they had used for filling. And there were a few other small issues, and it was really a sum of all of the parts kind of root cause situation where, we call it a catastrophic system failure, right? Everything broke, nothing worked. They didn't follow any of their written procedures, and we rejected 300,000 some odd units of this product, and it cost the co-man $2.5 million or $3 million. That's one fun horror story that I like to tell people.
Now, Nate, I would just like to throw in, there is a very high chance that the dude grinding the paint off, who was also the quality guy, also used that same angle grinder to cut holes in the tires for the cats. So,
for sure, yeah, for sure.
I feel like I've been to this place before. Obviously not that place, but I will tell you, right around the cat point is when it just got worse. At that point, I probably would have just left, right? It is almost 100% going to be their fault around the point in time that the cats start running out in front of you. But wow. Vlad, does it make you want to get into co-manufacturing?
I wasn't sure where the story was gonna go with the whole tire situation. I thought they started off like a backyard zoo, that's like a petting zoo at that point for the dogs coming in, and then whatever is bigger to deal with the dogs. But it's interesting. I've not seen those types of, I want to say, egregious failures. For me, it was mostly on the automation equipment, more so, when you had a requirement of like a check weigher or a like an X-ray machine, and it was disabled, for quite a bit of time, but it was in spec for quality. But that is an interesting story. I'm not even sure. I guess, where did they end up today? Did they make changes? It sounds like they were not even kind of as baffled as you were. They were just like, well, like, this is business as usual.
Yeah.
Did they change anything? What's that look like
They
now?
well, they lost us as a client, so I hope they made some changes after losing a pretty significant chunk of their business. But I know that this contract manufacturer is still around. They're still ISO 22716 certified. You'll see them at trade shows probably. I mean, they're still around making stuff for people. I hope they've made massive strides in improving their system since my last visit there, and hopefully MoCRA will help drive those changes even further for them. But I think that's typically my extreme story with cosmetics. Kind of the usual situation we run into when we audit, the usual negative situation, I should say, is similar to that first story we were talking about, where there is no quality team, someone in production, maybe one of the executives has been in the industry for a while. They have a vague understanding of what quality is, and they made a good faith effort to build a quality system, but nothing is documented. So if it's not documented, it never happened. We cannot trust but verify because there's nothing for us to verify. And it's really a speculative quality system built on a foundation of hoping nothing happens, hoping nothing goes wrong, right? And we see that all the time. I would say in the majority of co-mans that manufacture cosmetics for us that do less than $30 million a year in revenue, they're somewhere kind of on the spectrum of, I have no quality people, sort of have a quality system, or I have one or two quality people with limited experience who have ascended into a quality management role, but really aren't qualified to build the system, operate the system, and improve the system. And that's kind of our sweet spot is taking those people and those systems to the next level and teaching them what they need to be doing.
And look, I think maybe taking the other side, I think it's not always obvious what those practices and what those requirements are, right? To your point, an organization that scales from being a very small, kind of zero people on the quality side to requiring a team may not always have the right people in place to figure out what those requirements are. So I think, the three of us can talk about our experience because we've seen it and we've lived, through manufacturing. And I think we have some, I want to say, common sense, but there's not so common sense in all the items that you'd be describing. What procedures would be needed to scrape paint off a post, right? Though it's not the same as washing your hands in like a food and beverage
Right.
environment. So I think it's also important to bring in teams that truly understand the requirements and can educate whomever is assigned to that task, and not assume that they will necessarily just pick it up through osmosis.
Yeah, and I think when we look at clients who want to do the right thing, there's no better engagement for us as a consulting firm than having someone reach out and say, hey, I know there are a lot of things we don't know, and I think you can help us fix those things. We have a smart team here that just needs some guidance. That's a killer spot for us, where we have a team that's intellectually competent, intellectually curious, and is really hungry to kind of find that next gear and make magic happen within the quality system. And it's especially fun when we truly have management buy-in. And we have engagements sometimes where they want the outcome of the quality system more than they want the inputs within the quality system, right? It's overhead, it's inspectors, it's testing, it's this and that. They want that certification so they can get big business and move on and hang that certification on their wall. And those are challenging clients for us, and they're challenging places to work for quality people. And I think if you talk to anyone in quality, they'll tell you a story of somewhere they've worked or the place they work right now where the company makes decisions that are not in the best interest of the customer, but are in the best interest of the company's financial position, and they make concessions within the quality system where they really shouldn't because they don't understand risk. And there is not that level of support you really have to have a true quality system at the executive level. And I also think you really do need at least one person on the executive team who's a little bit more than vaguely aware of what a quality system is. We've seen way too many C-suites who have, 30 years of experience in the industry, but they don't know what a quality system is. They don't know that you have to test product or test materials upon receipt. They don't know what a quarantine hold process is. They don't know those things. And I think if you're at that level and you're in that position, odds are, you're one of the people that quality is going to report into. You have to know how to hold those people accountable inside the quality team, and you have to know what good looks like. You cannot promote someone because, they're really fast at inspecting product, and boom, now they're a quality supervisor, and wow, they've made other people really fast inspectors, and boom, now they're a quality manager. And fast forward a few years and they're just the saddest person in the world, getting yelled at during audits all day long and just miserable. And that's also another common scenario that we run into where, I'm all about promoting from within. I think if you have an incredible person on the team, do everything you can to continue to train them, keep them around, make them happy. But there has to be a point where we recognize that there is more that needs to be done kind of beyond what this person may be capable of doing. And that's a hard conversation to have. And I think that conversation needs to be had at, quite a few contract manufacturers and own label manufacturers as well, where, that scenario of I was a fast inspector and 10 years later, I'm a quality director. You may be really fast at inspecting still. You may have learned something about SPC. You may know a little bit about lean and some of those traditional, like industrial quality tools, but you have to have a lot of regulatory depth and, regulatory scheme knowledge to actually build a system that will work, from my perspective.
Not only the fastest quality inspector, but also the one with the least defects. That's
of course.
Exactly.
They go hand in hand. So Nate, I worked with a brand who will remain nameless for obvious reasons, and they kind of similar to your story. So the person in charge of quality was just the lab, right? And there was no quality over the rest of the organization, which was just a catastrophic failure in and of itself. But the person in charge of the lab was one of the first 8 people in, or was one of the interns that grew with the brand from this tiny brand to this, $50 to $80 million a year brand. And he was absolutely good, super meticulous, spent a bunch of time, did a bunch of that research, but didn't necessarily have the teeth in order to go stop things happening that shouldn't happen. And when you're just running the lab and you don't own quality over the entirety of the organization, and no one owns quality or health and safety over the entirety of the organization, there are absolutely problems with that. So Nate, I want to ask you what some brands can do to try to stay ahead of MoCRA. But first, folks, we've got 24 people watching us live at the moment. So if you guys are live, you can feel free to chat and comment. I know beauty and cosmetics and quality and compliance are all slightly different from what we talk about. But if you guys are watching live on LinkedIn or otherwise, please feel free to go ahead and throw your comments in, even if it's just to go ahead and say hi to Nate. I see Mark. Mark is commenting from Germany, folks. If Mark can comment from Germany, you guys can comment from what I imagine is mostly North America at this point in time. So go ahead, feel free to drop some comments in the chat, say hi to Nate, show him a warm welcome in this. But Nate, back to you. So MoCRA is coming. We've talked about some absolutely horror stories, which are maybe my most favorite part of the show. But we've talked about some absolute horror stories. How can brands stay away from those horror stories, right? What can they do to get ahead of MoCRA to make sure that they can go sell to the box stores, they can go sell to the Amazons and the other major marketplaces of the world? As you kind of said in the beginning, your estimation or guesstimation is it's going to be driven by those large brands. And if you don't have this MoCRA compliance, you're just going to be locked out from the shelves.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And It's hard to answer in some ways because, on the brand side, the regulations are less prescriptive than they are for a manufacturer, right? So MoCRA, for example, talks about safety substantiation, labeling requirements, things like that, where yes, you need to do those things, but how do we do those things? What systems need to be in place for us to make sure that we have the proper safety substantiation data? We have a way to make sure that our contract manufacturers or suppliers in general are also compliant with MoCRA, which is a responsibility of the brand. If your name is on that label, you are the responsible party for that product. And that is very important for brands to understand. And a lot of brands that we talk to, and a lot of brands generally, cosmetics or otherwise, still have the very incorrect belief that my contract manufacturer is taking care of it. They're going to handle this for us. They do compliance. They do quality. We don't have to worry about it. They have it under control. Those are also the same brands that don't audit their manufacturing partners. They don't have finished product specifications. They have no testing program that lets them trust but verify whatever the manufacturer says they're doing. And maybe they get a certificate of analysis with each finished product. Something that we've tried to do to really help brands understand the role they play within the regulation is, talking about some of those horror stories and asking some leading questions about, things that happen in their business that happen to everyone, right? Where you receive a product that does not meet your expectations. I don't want to say specification because they probably don't have a specification, but I don't like how this label looks. I don't like where you put this lot code. I don't like, insert whatever quality attribute you can think of. If none of those things are written down in a specification that is agreed upon by both parties, the manufacturer and the brand, I mean, you're just shouting into the wind. You have no recourse really, unless you're talking about a legal issue like a slack fill, underfill, something like that, or you have a micro issue or a possible consumer safety problem. Mm-hmm. You have no teeth to hold the supplier accountable. And so we've built out a pretty fast framework, a framework we can deploy pretty quickly to build a light kind of QMS for beauty brands, where we can run through product specifications, supplier management, supplier corrective actions, complaints, adverse event reporting, serious adverse event reporting, label reviews, formula reviews, all of the things that the brand may have expected their co-man is doing, but I can almost guarantee they're not doing, and kind of reshaping how they think of that supplier brand relationship. And that, it's fine if you go travel out to the co-man 3 times a year, you go have dinner, share a bottle of wine, and we're buddies. We go to each other's wedding and whatever. We go on vacation together. That's fine. We see that all the time where, the top to top, they're buddies and everything's just fine. But at the operational level, it's a nightmare in those situations, because now not only do we have no quality system or kind of a hodgepodge quality system, we have that relationship curveball of we don't want to upset our own C-suite by trying to hold this supplier accountable, because he knows that Jim Bob over here is trying to close on his house. And if we reject this product, his down payment is gone, right? And so you get those weird relationship curveballs, which make managing quality very, very challenging. And not only because of that, but I've worked at and with plenty of companies who, C-suite will just go right over the head of the quality team. Quality will say, we have to reject this. It does not meet our specification, or X, Y, and Z happened, and this no longer meets the label on our product. We don't have this much of this ingredient here, or we can't, ensure that the product will have this effect. It's so challenging to deal with those scenarios when you have that relationship issue in place and you don't have those adjacent systems and guide rails to control the relationship. And at the end of the day, I think if nothing else, my advice to brands would be find someone who is qualified to go audit your manufacturing partners. If you don't want a quality system, fine, but you have to have boots on the ground at least once or twice a year through a technical set of eyes to make sure that your co-man is doing everything that they're supposed to be doing in accordance with the law, but also to meet the expectations of your relationship. And you can help that process by having a quality agreement, having finished product specifications, and making sure that there are written expectations for both parties. And that's, I think to me, that's where I would start. Audit your manufacturers, have some basic agreements in place, and hopefully you do build a corporate quality system. Hopefully you do some surveillance testing and maybe a surprise inspection of the co-man, but you have to know if your co-man is compliant. You have to. You cannot bank on trusting them.
Nate, if I can follow up on that same thought, and just to clarify maybe the earlier point slash like Dave's question as well. So at the current stage, you as the brand, you don't necessarily have requirements, but when you ultimately sell to a distributor, they have certain expectations, and now they're going to be following the expectations of MoCRA. Similar to the audit of you auditing that co-packer, they would audit the brand to understand how compliant they are. Could you maybe explain what that looks like today, and what that's going to be more in the future, and what kind of doors that closes for the brands as well if they're not compliant, just so we understand a bit better?
Yeah, so brands typically are not audited at the corporate quality management system level. It's more of a situation where, using retail, for example, I'm trying to get my product into Costco. There are so many scientific and quality hoops you have to jump through to get your product on shelf with Costco. You have to have, 3 different scientific sources to substantiate whatever claim you are making with your product. You have to have data. You have to have safety data. You have to have actual analytical microbiological testing data with this product that you can put into a scientific binder you then submit to Costco or whatever retailer. And so that's really kind of where the audit with an asterisk happens, is you're challenged by prospective retail partners in that they ask you for all of the data that they want in order to approve your product to be sold at their store or on their website. And that is incredibly challenging for a lot of brands. And if you think of the traditional, skincare, beauty brand story, it's, I formulated this on my kitchen counter, and I made this in my garage, or I made this here, and now we're in a small boutique co-man, and we have an opportunity to, have 4 SKUs placed at, whatever retailer. Suddenly they realize, I don't have the data that they want. I have never audited my manufacturer. How do I get a GMP certificate for my co-man? I don't know what GMPs are. They don't have a GMP certification. They don't have any of those things. How do I find safety substantiation data? Do I have to do a randomized clinical trial on my product, or can I go to PubMed and research, or can I go to ToxNet and do research that way? And so that's really where the quality system is stress tested at the brand level, I think, is typically going to be through those retail and distribution opportunities where, if that retailer is eating some risk with you by selling your product, they want to know that it's at the very least safe and is labeled in compliance with the law, and you can show that it was manufactured safely. And that's very challenging to do. If you have no corporate brand level quality system, you've never done any auditing, you don't have a surveillance testing program in place, you don't have anything in place because you rely on the co-man, which is a very, very dangerous game to play.
And not, I guess, wanting to throw any specific distributors under the bus, but is that a compliance that pretty much everybody requires? Like if you go to Costco, Amazon, Target, like is that a blanket requirement with all of them?
Yes and no. I think most major retailers, including Amazon and some of the digital platforms, have some level of a hoop to jump through where you have to submit documentation for your product. The depth in which they require that documentation is very different across retailers. I mean, the difference from Costco to Whole Foods to Target to Walmart, very different. I mean, albeit similar, but very different sets of, document requests are there. And, if you're a brand and you want to take over the retailer game, you need to figure out what the most stringent requirement is and build your system against that requirement. So if that most challenging requirement for you is going to be Costco, you need to hit that Costco level of quality documentation for everything, so you don't miss those opportunities. And I've worked at companies where, I'm minding my own business on a Tuesday, just doing my thing, running a quality and compliance department, and I get a panicked phone call from C-suite that says, I have 20 or 30 products I want to submit to this retailer. The buyer just called. We have sales and marketing throwing a slide deck together showing all of the fun things about this product or these 20 to 30 products, but we are missing these things. We're missing safety substantiation. We are missing, claim substantiation. Can you quickly get safety substantiation, claim substantiation, and review labels for these 20 to 30 products by Thursday, so we can pitch this to whatever retailer by Friday? And oftentimes, hell or high water, we make it happen. I mean, you have to figure out a way to do it. If you have to call in consultants, external support, make it happen, you do it, so the business doesn't lose that opportunity. But it's a very awkward and uncomfortable situation to be in when Thursday morning rolls around and you tell them, hey, I can't actually substantiate this claim, or I cannot provide sufficient safety data to show that this product is safe at that Costco threshold level. And I've had to do that many times, or we go through that process and we say, oops, we have to update these 7 labels due to a regulatory change or due to an ingredient change. And you get caught in this, rock and hard place situation of everyone is mad at you, and no matter what you do, you're the bad guy and you're going to ruin someone's day, whether it's your day or your boss's day or the marketing team's day. Somebody's day is going to get ruined, and it's going to be your fault. It is how it's going to feel, even though, philosophically, this sounds like a planning issue versus a quality issue. Maybe we should have planned for this, retail reset a little bit better, but what do we know? Yeah, it's hard. It is so hard to kind of find that balance between doing the right thing, knowing what the right thing to do is, and having visibility into what the business plans to do, because you could be going in 2 completely different directions, and you have to have that insight from the business. And what does the sales team want to get into whatever retailer this quarter? Let's focus on those SKUs.
I love this, Nate, and I feel like your comments re sometimes quality has to be a bad guy is a really good setup, because as we were having a conversation kind of on some of these topics, Nate said something to the effect of, hey, quality guys sometimes have to be bad guys, and Vlad's like, I hate quality people. In my line of work in the automation or maintenance or other lines, there is the need to go get product through. And I feel like most of the time, and lots of times on Manufacturing Hub, we talk about the need to go get product through without necessarily including also of the correct quality and compliance and all of those other things, because at some point it feels like rot speed is the most important part. I'm wondering, Nate, can you talk to perhaps some young quality folks here and give them some pieces of recommendation so that they don't run into a big bearded guy like me or a slightly less bearded guy like Vlad, who is like, we need to go ship the product because the product was due 2.5 weeks ago. So can you give them some recommendations as to how to deal with the political and perhaps less than great side of quality conversations?
That is a dangerous question, a very dangerous question. I think there are a few things tied in first place. in my mind as far as what you should do. The first is have a clear or at least general understanding of the business, not of business in the sense that you have to have an MBA, but you have to know how money flows in and out of the business. That's the number one thing you have to know. And in manufacturing, that's typically very simple. You get a PO, you make product, you ship the product, you get paid. Boom. That's the flow of cash, right? But if you don't understand how that flows, or you don't care that that is how cash moves in and out of the business, you're always going to be fighting an uphill battle because you are not going to look at situations through the eyes of the business. And that is very important within quality. Not to say that, the business needs outweigh the needs of quality and compliance, but you have to understand it. Otherwise, the decisions you make are going to be, fought against tooth and nail. You have to be reasonable within the business landscape. The second thing I would say is you have to understand the life of your fellow stakeholders here. You have to understand how the engineering team is held accountable, how their performance is measured, how sales, marketing, production, anyone adjacent to quality, what them doing a good job looks like, and what you can do to help your peers look good, right? If you can become known as that person who is reasonable, generally understands the business, can be more predictive of those business needs, and you're known as being helpful and can step outside of that role of quality and help people, that is huge. I think separately from that, there will be situations where, yes, you understand the needs of the business. You understand that, company's not going to get paid if you don't get product out the door, but that product is non-conforming. And there are different levels of non-conformance that should dictate the path you take to either get that product out the door or destroy it or rework it or something in between, right? There will be situations where, it's a regulatory issue, or it is a semantic quality problem it's not going to kill anybody, Nate. Let's just ship it. No one's going to care. I've had those conversations so many times, and I lose my marbles every time someone tells me that. Because if that is the expectation for a product release, is this going to kill someone? Yes, no. The answer is no, we're going to ship it. If the answer is yes, we're going to talk about it a little bit more and probably not ship it. Those are very frustrating conversations to have. And I think it also goes back to understanding what the business is and understanding what dangerous means, and not crying wolf and pretending that things that are not, catastrophic issues that could lead to, consumer injury or death or litigation, recalls, anything like that. You have to understand what those different levels of non-conformance are versus, I have 5.2% of labels that are crooked, and my AQL says if anything over 5% is crooked, I'm rejecting this whole thing. We're redoing all of the labels. Those are situations where maybe you can write a deviation, open up a CAPA, and figure out how to make your labels a little less crooked on the next run, where it's not a regulatory issue. It's sort of a quality issue, cosmetically, no pun intended. It's a quality issue, but it's not going to harm anyone. It's not going to put the business in harm's way. It's just, this doesn't look as good as it should or as good as it normally should. And those are situations where you really have to understand, is it worth rejecting an entire production lot, killing everybody with rework, blowing up a release date, and really affecting people downstream? Is it worth it? But there are also situations where, this product tested positive for X, Y, and Z bacteria, and this retest is going to take 7 days, and it is what it is. You have to wait 7 days, not going to budge. You can have everyone in the company standing in my office yelling at me about it, but that product is not getting released, period. And you have to be comfortable having those conversations, but you can't have those conversations confidently unless you know how the business operates and you understand what those different levels of non-conformance and really those different risk levels look like, and what are reasonable paths forward to solve those problems. It's a very long answer to the question, but I think in a nutshell, you have to understand the business. You have to understand the process, the people, and the risks associated with everything to make intelligent decisions and not be so dramatic about every little thing that goes wrong. I know that is something quality people are known for is, we've made a mountain out of this molehill and quality's panicking. And if you're crying wolf about stuff that truly doesn't matter, odds are no one's going to like you, and it's actually your fault because you should have prevented that in the first place through your quality system, and shame on you. And I tell people that too, where I have quality managers say, my boss doesn't listen to me. He's just saying, oh, all you say is I can't do this, I can't do that. And I'm usually not on the side of the quality person there, because if you're just that guy or that girl saying no, that's all you are, is you're the no person. You can't stop with a no. You can say no, and here's why I gave you a no. Here are a few other solutions or a few other options we can try to help you achieve, whatever that business outcome is that we're telling you no to. It might take longer. You might be grumpy about it, but I want to help you get across that finish line, not just throw roadblocks at you left and right for no reason, just because I can, because I'm the quality person.
I want to, I guess, Nate, bring us back to a conversation that I think we've outlined in our notes, and I think is very relevant to the point you just made about maybe releasing some of those products, but also the previous point, which was, there's very stringent requirements for some of the distributors, but you obviously have the choice of selling those products through your own channels, right? And so I think maybe
Right.
for the consumers out there, what does that landscape currently look like? And again, my understanding is that MoCRA is going to be now the new standard through which if someone creates something, let's say on a small scale or in their kitchen, and then tries to sell that on the flea market, that's going to be a lot more regulated and requires some more compliance versus what it currently does. So again, from a consumer standpoint, what are the regulations going to change, and maybe what are they today, right? Like what can be sold and cannot be sold on the cosmetic side, and how is that going to change in the years to come?
I think with FDA typically, and same story with MoCRA, there are small business exemptions to certain provisions within these regulations. So there are small business exemptions with MoCRA, in that if your revenue is below X dollars between X time frame, you don't have to comply with these incredibly expensive requirements within MoCRA. But outside of kind of the farmers market side of the industry, which I'll touch on as well, we should see a lot of improvement and a lot of trust and transparency leaps forward over the next few years. Even if I'm, a digitally native brand, I'm only doing direct to consumer on my website and nowhere else, I'm still subject to MoCRA. I still have to, get it together and do safety substantiation research. I have to test my product. I have to make sure my label meets requirements within MoCRA. I have my fragrance allergens labeled correctly. I have manufactured my product against whatever these GMPs from FDA end up being. And I think on the consumer side, we should start to see that trust and that transparency improve a lot, I hope. But I mean, I think your average consumer, they're not going to know anything about MoCRA. They're not going to really understand the Wizard of Oz kind of behind the curtain there that is requiring all of these changes. I think one thing the beauty industry does very well is marketing. And we are going to see a lot of companies, a lot of brands reframe how they talk about their product in a very, kind of casual sense, and say, we're the first to be this transparent, and here are our suppliers. Here's, kind of end-to-end supply chain transparency. On the supplement side, I think a good example of transparency is Ritual. If you go to Ritual's website, you'll see certificates of analysis. You'll see end-to-end supply chain transparency and things like that. And I love Ritual. They're an awesome brand. I think a very admirable brand that I hope other brands look up to. I think they do. And I think we'll see a lot of brands start to take that approach in how they talk about their product, where it's maybe less about what the product does for you. Of course, the product should be efficacious and high quality, but here are the good things we are doing behind the scenes. Here's, the good ESG work we're doing. Here's how we take care of our suppliers and make sure that, we use, fair trade practices for whatever, and we source things ethically and sustainably. I think we'll see a lot more of that on the brand side. All right, now the little mom and pop shops, I have a bone to pick with them. So there are small business exemptions. There are things you are not required to do, but you still have to make sure your product is safe. I get frustrated by, hearing things like, oh, I only do $250,000 a year. I have no margin to test my product. If you can't afford a $70 micro test a few times a year on your product, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Anybody can find that $70 or however many dollars you need to spend on a simple test to show, at the very least, I do not have microbiological contamination here, and you are not putting a bunch of bacteria on your face that is going to harm someone, right? And there are exemptions to the exemption, right? Where if you have, a cosmetic that goes near a mucous membrane, like near the eyes, nose, mouth, those exemptions are gone because those are higher risk products. But I have a firm belief that anyone in any industry, especially within CPG, needs to be truthful to the consumer. And you can be truthful by testing your product to make sure it's safe, because the consumer has an assumption. When you go to the grocery store and you go online and you buy a product, you are assuming it's not going to harm you. You are assuming you are not going to have an adverse reaction or have some medical event happen because I put this, nighttime fine wrinkle eye cream around my eyes, and then you wake up and your eyes are all puffy and you have to go to the hospital. You don't expect those things to happen. And I think it's up to the industry, any manufacturer, any brand, any shape, any size, to do anything they can to provide those assurances to the consumer that you are buying a safe product from us. It is not going to hurt you. I think that should always be the bare minimum right there, is test your product, make sure it is safe, manufacture things in a way that are clean. If you are manufacturing at your home, do it in a clean way. Make sure you have the right licenses and certifications from the state you live in. Make sure that you wash everything in between each batch that you're manufacturing. There are simple things you can do that, following like just basic food safety, like safe food handling processes that carry over to cosmetics as well. Wash your hands, clean your stuff, test your product, boom, done. You have a quality system, sort of.
I think my takeaway is to I was gonna say, I think my takeaway is to purchase maybe from a larger distributor, because then they've done the compliance checklist at the very least, right? But when you buy directly, it becomes a bit more of a question. But no, I appreciate that breakdown. I think that certainly helps at least me and our listeners, and I think it's very important to understand these nuances. As I mentioned to both of you before the stream, I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation, but there's a lot of debates as to what is safe, what isn't, and whose fault it is. And it's not always clear as a consumer what those, like where those like gray lines fall. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with that. I guess I have many other thoughts, as probably most of our listeners who are still at this point, if they're not like in their medicine cabinets, just throwing out everything they own, are probably very interested in this. But Nate, let me go ahead and ask you the questions that we go ahead and ask all of our guests. This has been an amazing conversation. And I think I know where it's going to go when I ask you to predict the future, but I'm going to go ask you to predict the future in beauty and cosmetics anyway.
I think the future of beauty and cosmetics is going to be better than, the current state and what we've seen in the past. I think FDA will draw on best practices, speaking really about GMPs from other countries, from ISO 22716, and they will put together what I hope is a pretty comprehensive set of good manufacturing practice requirements for the industry that exceeds those within ISO 22716, which are challenging but still pretty basic. And so I think we'll see a lot of improvement happening there. I also think in that same breath, it will become more challenging to become a manufacturer or become a brand as these regulatory obstacles have been introduced. And I think we'll start to see an even wider chasm between, basic quality knowledge and practical quality knowledge, where, going back to that, I'm a fast inspector versus I don't have regulatory depth knowledge. That will continue to be an issue. I also, no disrespect to the FDA, maybe a little bit, know that this is going to be a clunky rollout of this regulation. They don't have that much cash set aside to implement MoCRA. I mean, they have a few $100 million to do it, but you look at the size of the market, that's probably not enough. And FDA has limited resources, and I think to rely on FDA is always going to be a challenge. But I think the industry is going to improve, really driven more by retailers than FDA themselves, from my perspective.
And I think that's interesting. I think that's exciting. We've had other conversations where industry or some type of regulation will drive the larger groups in general. And I think that'll be interesting. And I'm hopeful that's the case because it'll be better for all of us, especially all of us who take strange green and other colored supplements on the regular basis. Nate, that was fantastic. I'd like to ask you for some career advice, perhaps some career advice maybe to a more broader quality group or people looking to get into quality.
I think broadly, slow down, take a breath, and pay attention to the business you are in. Don't get so, blinded by all of the noisy day-to-day operational things that happen that you cannot see the bigger picture. I think the bigger picture is obviously different within every business, but understand how the business operates and the role that quality plays within the business. And from there, you can really figure out the best way to build a quality system, improve the quality system, and get buy-in where you need buy-in. And there will always be times where you wish you had buy-in, where you will never have buy-in, but you have to understand the business, you have to understand the regulations, and you have to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations with people and say, I understand that this sucks. You don't want to do it. I might not even want to do it, but we have to do it. And here is how we can do this together. That is definitely the career advice, is slow down and pay attention.
Absolutely. I think that is fantastic career advice for all of us. Next up, would like to ask you for a book recommendation, please.
The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker. All day, every day. If you are a brand new quality person, you have to read the Toyota Way. If you like textbooks, read the 4th edition of ASQ Certified Manager of Quality, Organizational Excellence book. That's a good one too. But I think the Toyota Way really illustrates the two foundational, components of a good quality system. And that's respect for people and continuous improvement, right? You really have to understand that. And I think the Toyota Way, in a narrative sense, does a great job of outlining how Toyota became successful in, really pioneering modern quality management.
Yep. Absolutely. I know I've had conversations about the Toyota Way on shows before. I'm not sure we've ever had conversations about it on Manufacturing Hub. So I would absolutely agree with that. If you're in quality or operational excellence or operations or kind of any of those things, absolutely a good book to read. It kind of like lots of other books that have been out for a while are a bit outdated. I guess, at least in my opinion, on a couple of things. I'm not a huge fan of wooden boards or dry erase boards when we could just digitalize things. But that's the automation guy in me, Nate. So you'll have to forgive that.
You are forgiven.
Perfect. And then last question for you is how can our listeners help you? Who should reach out? Who do you want to connect with? What sort of conversations are you looking to have?
Yeah, I love having conversations about all things quality and compliance. I am very, very active on LinkedIn. I usually post 3 to 5 times a week. If anyone listening has questions about what is the quality system, how do I make sure my products are compliant, feel free to reach out. I'm not going to hit you with an invoice for a 2-minute response on LinkedIn, no sweat. But beauty brands and manufacturers, dietary supplement brands and manufacturers, food, beverage, those are our clients, right? Really of any shape and size, wherever they are on their quality journey, whatever level of organizational maturity they have. We have really developed a clear path to getting them across the finish line, whatever that finish line looks like. And if they don't know what that finish line is or where it needs to be, we can help them identify what needs to happen. And that's something we love doing. We love making things better. I think all quality people should love making things better. And yeah, I mean, if you're a brand or manufacturer and you see these spooky regulations, or you don't see them, but you still want to make things better, let's chat about it. We can help.
Absolutely. I love that. And I will say that if you guys aren't that and also still want to go follow along, Nate, I really enjoy his quality stories that I get to see on LinkedIn, which is, I think, where Nate and I first connected over those stories. I don't have nearly as many good quality stories, but the ones I do share are just absolute catastrophes, which also might have been where Nate and I connected one of those first times. But Nate, this has been awesome. Everyone, thank you for hanging out with us again on Manufacturing Hub. If you guys, again, haven't, please make sure that you follow Nate. Make sure you're following Vlad and myself and Manufacturing Hub. We do shows like this just about every Wednesday at 4 o'clock East Coast time, except next week. Next week, we're going live at 4:30 East Coast time. We're talking about co-packing, which will be good. I honestly am not sure how we will get that done in 60 to 75 or 4.5 hours worth of minutes, because it's going to be a jam-packed show. If you guys are listening on podcast form, you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe, like, and share. If you're listening on podcast form, rate us 5 stars, hit the follow button, and automatically download those podcasts so you get all of us in your earbuds every Thursday, which is the day we go ahead and release those. Until next time, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.